Today we're going to finish up on Dave Doerr's utility racks and just look at the last couple that were left in the list at the utility racks page. And we're going to look at the rest of the shared files that are in the shared files section and discuss a little bit about the ones that have patch changes. They're like patch collections that are driven by states. So you use states to be able to send basically you're sending a program change to your hardware synth. So it's a whole bunch that are in here for hardware synths. But then I want to review a little bit more about the tricks that we talked about on Monday and get into that somewhat, musing about how much further we can take that in Performer a bit. And also, I do want to show off some of Dave Doerr's latest things, the button faders and the pedal fade, and his new scroller, the note scroller, which is pretty darn fancy. I'm not going to go into depth on those because he's already made videos explaining fully how to set those up and how to use them, but I will plug them big time. So let me go into the share screen, and here we're at the bottom of the list with the last items. We talked about the pitch wheel Leslie switch and the ones before it, the 2x2, all these really neat utilities, the splitter router matrixer. The pitch wheel to switch is similar to the Leslie switch, except it gives you more switches that it outputs. And so the idea is you use your pitch wheel and you can use it in up mode, down mode. That's what these little arrows represent, is whether you've moved the controller up or down, and it's state driven to pick from among these. And you simply filter your keyboard through it and it takes your pitch wheel and converts it to these various switches, and you can select these as the outputs. So you have the various kinds, the button, the momentary, which is just press and let go and it just sends a signal, a toggle, and the CC64 for Leslie's. Apparently, I don't own any of these organ VSTs that have this. A lot of them use the CC64 to change the speed of the Leslie, whereas I use, since I use UVI's rotary, it has a hold position as well. So I use an expression pedal, so the down expression pedal is slow, midway in the expression pedal is hold, and then all the way up is fast. Okay, so that's pretty simple. Now he's got down here the note scroller, but he's just come out with a super serious bunch of note scrollers that scroll the notes for a song in very fancy ways. So the original one just had speeds that you could set it at using states of how fast it would scroll. But boy, he's taken it so much further. It's insane. Now it's got pause buttons, it's got fast forward buttons, it's got ways to use it as a teleprompter. So I'll show you that. Scroll Deluxe and Simple Scroll. Well, Scroll Deluxe is very, very deep. The nice thing about it is, go to the home, he explains it in full documentation, has a demo video, so that's why I'm not going to go over it and repeat what he's already done so well. So he shows how to set it up, what it does, and a demo video that shows it in use in the various ways. So I recommend looking at that. I also recommend looking at his button fade safe, and that's also got full description of how to set it up, and 2 videos, one showing the settings, how to do the settings, and another showing it in action. And so that's basically you press a button and it fades up. Press it again, it'll stop fading up. Press it again, it'll continue fading up till it reaches the top. Your next press will make it fade down. press it again, you pause it, press it again, it continues fading down until it reaches the bottom. And you can change the scale of the speed of the fade. You can change what the extremes are going to be, what the max value and min values are going to be. So in this one, it works that way. That's what button safe is. It single presses, it just continues up. Button fade, which also has a video explaining it. It has the ability to change directions at midway. It's got the pause now built in. It works for transport, or it works individually. It can be used as a teleprompter type setup. You can start the transport, just automatically will start. It includes things like delays, where there's a delay before it starts. So you can say, wait 3 seconds before you start. And then when it gets to a certain point in the song, you can put in a pause that's timed already for you. So it'll pause for a certain number of seconds. So if you know that that's going to be the section that there's no lyrics, you can then have it pause while you're doing your amazing lead playing, or waiting for the guitarist to finish their amazing lead playing. And then it'll automatically start up again as the lyrics section begins once more. So you can set in these automated pauses and put in multiples of them, all via the bindings. So it's pretty darn fantastic. And again, like I said, there's no use in repeating what he already covers so very well in these videos. And then he's got a similar thing, again, with videos, a video covering the settings. That's a pedal fader. And now you move your pedal and it controls what the rate is going to be of that fade up, fade down. And a very good video with it. Okay? So there you go. There's big plug. These are really very cool tools. Very high-end applications of the various things that we can do in here. One last item in the utilities rack, brought to us by Phantom XR, was something that he was looking for, basically where you keep track of a single note. And if you hit that single note a certain number of times, that on the last hit it could create a change, a signal that makes a change, like a change to another state or a change in patches, whatever. It would provide something to the bindings that could be then triggering a change. So he's found this thing in the PISMIDI set of things that you can download. He uploaded the 64-bit version. And it does exactly that. It keeps track of the number of times you've hit a note. And when you hit like if you set it for 6 on the 7th hit, you can make it output a completely different note. And it can be a super high note that's off of the keyboard. In an 88-key keyboard, it can be a really high or really low MIDI note. And have that note then trigger the binding into place and have it work. So there's some more fantastic options that are built in to some of these plugins that lets us expand our palette, so to speak, of what we can do in Cantabile. Now let's go to one last rack, was to come up with a solution that Lee's Keys had. He wanted to be able to have a drone occur until a certain situation was met, a certain situation, rather than have you read this whole thing. We'll go right down to the solution that Neil Durant gave us with his sustainer rack. What this does is it'll start the drone, and you can make it so that it will continue droning till you reach the 4th song state, for instance. So you can make it drone till you change to a certain state, and changing to the state will then turn it off. So you can get the drone going in state 1, and now just not even worry about it and let it drone away until you switch over to state 4 or state 7, whatever. State 19, if you really do drone music a lot with heavy duty drones, it lasts for a long time. Or, state 89 if you do music for airports or whatever. But
Or cosmic German music.
yeah,
Klaus Schulz. Klaus
cultural
Schulz.
stuff. Well, it's kind of handy if you're doing like I do. I used to do a show that involved a bunch of arpeggiators going, and the way I keep them all going was by reversing the sustain pedal, so that when I let go of the sustain pedal, that's when it's sustained. So I could get an arpeggiator started and in sync with my metronome that I'm hearing here, and get another one going and fade them in and out on my Behringer faders. But to have it be state controlled instead of having to stretch all over the place to get to these pedals when I want to turn them off, or give up a hand to fade it out, it's kind of cool. I'm gonna possibly exploit that if I ever do that type of show again. But what I was doing was counterpunctual arpeggiators basically, and then playing leads over the top of that. So that's application of a drone concept, is to have a droning arpeggiator. It takes it even further. Okay, well anyway, that's well, that's the end of the utility rack discussion as far as just the regular utility racks. And this is just before this came out, before we had the latched keys, the sticky notes filter. So now that we have a sticky notes filter, that's really cool. It makes it even easier to kind of tie this into states. So rather than using this plug-in, the sustainer rack, you could easily apply this anywhere you wanted and set up something that would supply the new notes that turn it off, perhaps. Because, in the sticky notes filter, it sticks when you push it the first time, and you push it same notes again, and it on sticks. But anyway, sustain rack is specifically made to get the drone started and ignore input until you want it to change, and then to have a specific input reverse. So it's not obsolete, I wouldn't say. All righty, let's go back into Cantabile here. And as we were doing last week, I wanted to just take this a little bit further, talking about the options of having a embedded rack or regular rack, and using these rack audio ports and rack MIDI ports filters, and how you can add a filter input port and do filters right there, adding all of these filters. All we did so far, fooling around with it Monday, was we messed around a little bit with some suppress events and allow events types of action. But when you consider that all of the filters are available, and you can use this in either solo or performer, opens up quite a wide range of ways that you can target this, because now I can target this input right from my inputs section. But what I wanted to see, and let's go ahead and we'll make a suppress event, and on initialize we'll suppress. We'll allow, we'll suppress no nodes, we'll suppress nothing for now. But just to have it, so we have a thing called named test filter. Now, one thing we didn't look at was whether in the bindings we then have access to this as a tool. Let's see, rack by index name, rack 40, MIDI out, there we go. All right, maybe that's rack 40. All right, so we can access what it's got, rack 40, and access its MIDI out. So we can simply pre-filter, we can go into the rack, we can add some outs, and we can add more outs to it. So we got the MIDI out, so let's go ahead and add another port. We got an input port, let's add an output port. rack 40 special. And this also can have a filter. But right now we just want to see it avail itself to the bindings. There we go. And down here is called rack 40. There it is. And there's rack 40 special. So now we have this transmuted input that was sent from the inputs to a specific input that got filtered, and we make that output go out rack 40 special instead of the generalized rack MIDI out. And we can take this mutated input that we've already filtered, we can make it on the way out be changed even further by the output port, because that's got its own set of filters. So now it can be taking something in that's been transmuted on the way in, or filtered, or whatever, suppressed, where it's just, so you're sending everything to it, but you're sending that you want this filtered so that the rack only gets this aspect of your controller, say, if you're using suppress. Then send it on the way out of the special and filter it even further so that you can be outputting a very specialized result. It could be notes that are transposed via those filters, for instance, transposed to those outer reaches of the MIDI zone so that they have a special meaning now, act as switches. So that's the general intro to what I'm starting to think about, is just how much further this can be taken using these special racks used as filters. Now, an interesting thing that Dave Dorr pointed out was using the bindings in place of the inputs up here. Because as you know, this can get pretty insane if you're doing a whole lot of different connections, and it gets longer and longer and longer, and there's just one list. Whereas in the bindings, you can do the same things with the inputs, and you can do this in solo too. You can take your inputs in here, and like I'm doing in here, and do this to route your various instruments. So you could even just make a very simple, any input port, make it very simple in terms of, there we are, say the 225, and just send it to an instrument. Same as you would over here at the top. But you do it in here, and you can create what? You can create a group and call it nothing but hardware 2 cents. And then start dropping these suckers in there. Right? Absence. Oh, MIDI in. There we go. And send it. So, okay, take note of that. There's two. It shows the one is the access to the engine controls and to all of the built-in automation parameters that are in the sense. The other is just the plain MIDI in. And that allows you to just send your notes and all that kind of stuff. Now, if I'm sending notes, it means I can map them. Oh my gosh, that's insane. And I can change the curve. I would have to send MIDI off. Would I have to send notes off also?
So,
Well, that adds a layer of complication. I'd rather it wasn't happening, but well, anyway, the nice thing about it is that it keeps it in one place where it's a little easier to read if you do a huge amount of this stuff. Anyway, in his video, you'll see him explaining why he did it that way for his button controllers and why he advised doing your routing this way rather than doing it from up in here, because this gets a little complicated sometimes. I have one, I put in all of those that had drop downs. Yeah, this one right here, drop down presets template. I'll load it in and let you see it. It's all these synths that I have where the drop downs work right away. So they would work. These are all synths that would work in any solo or performer, or yeah, I guess in light too. All right. So you see, this gets a little ridiculous. Okay. But it was just so I could power up one of these synths and have the keyboard already mapped to it. Most of these in here are ones from Reactor. They're Reactor synths. And they're the older synths, and they use the older patch formats, so they all work out in here with the drop-down menus. When I wake them up, you'll see that I've got all their patches appear in the drop-down. So I basically just onload them, and when I want to look at one's patches, I just wake it up, see its patches, and go through them and try them out. And it's just a way of getting introduced to some of these that I've had forever and have never tried, but it's kind of a quick way to go through them because they all have the drop downs. And once I find something I like, it's an easy thing to just then copy it and paste it into another song. But that is why you see me with this insane number of inputs up in here, so that all I had to do was wake up the synth, and I've already had my main keyboard connected to it.
That's something I haven't really sorted out in my head is the patch handling. Some of the things I use that they show up, and other ones, I have to make them. So it sounds like why that is. I never.
It has to do with this big, massive shift that seemed to be going on, maybe as people started transitioning to VST3, but even before that, you started seeing people putting in their own preset management systems to handle having, selling you the synth with 1,000 presets. Whereas the older synths, you got a bank
128
at the most.
Yeah.
You got a bank of 127, 0 through 127, with 128 presets. So it was already built into their VST with this list with a bank loaded in, an FXB type bank. And so that's what gets exposed in the normal method where you see the drop downs already have the things, is because upon load it loads in an FXB, the last used FXB file.
I have synths where there is a list of 64 patches and they're just not in there.
Well, if it's that kind of list, it should work if you select that mode. Let me go ahead and take a look at one for you. So this does not, Podolsky does not have that.
Made
I made these. And so when you go to the change menu, use plugins programs, if it had been a normal VST FXB type file bank, use plugins programs would have shown its FXB banks. But because it doesn't, I'm using the plugin snapshots mode. I have had, even though parameter sets is faster, it only stores the exploitable, automatable parameters. So a synth that doesn't have a lot of parameters in it, it doesn't necessarily save enough parameters to represent the patch. You know what I'm saying? If the patch is all about stuff that's automatable, then sure. And some do expose tons and tons of parameters to their automation, and others show very few. I was surprised to see how few massive exposed. And one way you can sort of see the number is plugin editor, plugin parameters. There it is. You open up plugin parameters and take a look at the list, and this is it. This is all that's exposed. So Massive X actually only exposes, for the most part, its macros. And then you've got the macros are programmed into the patch. So you have to be at the patch level to do do their various changes and assign those to macros. Whereas you get something else like this, and you look at its plugin parameters, and it goes on forever
Like
because
that's probably
everything's
going to really have all the settings.
that'll have all the settings. So in that case, the parameter mode will work. See?
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
And if you're lucky that they just use the VST, the old version, then you'll have all of the you have access to a huge drop-down list, like you saw in my other racks there. Most of the reactor synths have the full drop-down and work, and you can load it in another bank, and the new bank will work. The old ones by Linplug do that, although its model seems to be a little broken lately, that I have to have the synth GUI open for the drop-downs to work. And it used a bank system where you could select amongst banks, and so when you selected a bank in like Spectral or in Morphox or one of those, CRX4, then the drop-down list would expose all the patches that were in that bank. But lately, it doesn't seem to respect the drop-down list unless, I select from it, unless I've got the GUI open. But, Linplug said so many changes happening, they didn't want to keep up with it, and that's why they went out of business. But they're still such good synths, so I use them. And they're 64-bit, so I use them. And I paid for them, so I use them. All right, well, let's see. What else did I want to really go? Well, yeah, so I got this conversation starter thing going on. We have these inputs and output filters that we can go crazy with and then deliver that output. Furthermore, we can deliver those to the bindings. And then we can use the bindings to take those in other directions. So say, let's just take a look at some of these. We've already got my test filter as an input, and look at its MIDI filters, and it's just we got a suppress in here. But what other things might be handy to send an incoming to a binding from here? I mean, you got the buttons, banks, channel select, channel map for sure. Be able to change the input to a different channel and to be delivering whatever shows up on that channel to the bindings, is what the binding's going to react to. So now you're outside the realm of the normal channel that the input's coming in on. So you'd be sending that to the bindings without any kind of cross interference. So you can still be sending similar signals along the normal channel that's going to the synths, but be sending to the bindings via a different channel altogether, just to make certain affectations to some other synth, for instance. And I can see where that kind of approach might be really interesting when you want a single action to control a whole bunch of different synthesizers, a bunch of different VSTIs or filters. Or to have a certain action also do enable, disable, or enable and suspend to various portions of a rack. And it can be of any rack. That's the really neat thing. When you go into the bindings, now you're talking about your selection that you've chosen in here, key range to note. Remember, that was originally for like drumming, so that you could make four notes all play a snare. But have that be so you make it so you're doing a splay of notes, where you're going whoosh, and as long as you hit this bunch of notes, an action happens. And it doesn't mess with your performance thing because you might have sent it to some other channel to actually have the action, and on that other channel is a completely different synth or different filter. Yeah, just amusing. But But those are the things that we've hardly even touched upon, are the other various bindings capabilities that are inside of there. And the fact that we can we can have special inputs for the input filters and have those go to special outputs is really pretty cool. I do want to see in the bindings, if I have an input port, go ahead and paste that in again. And take a look at my, what did we call this? Rack 40. Okay, so we can make rack 40, and there's that test filter input. So I can choose its special input ports as outputs from my device also. So I've got this rack that's got a whole slew of these input filters, input related type filters, and I could be sending it to that too. And have that, its output, go to various places. So it's kind of cool. Now some of the filtering, of course, is easily done right in here because you're picking what you're going to send and already pre-filtering in here. But there's some things that those filters can do that aren't in this list. Many things. And but there's so many things that you can change. So you can do a lot of things that are filter related in here and change things and map things and convert channel pressures, but you can't change channel pressure to a different thing using this filter. So you can only do that with the other filters. So this is where it might be cool to come into rack 40 that changes channel pressure to pitch bend, and then take the output of that and make that pitch bend control the synth somehow. Plus there's loopback, of course, which I have turned off at the moment. Anyway, that's one thing, by the way. Notice in Dave Doerr's dissertation, for his button things to work, you've got to turn on that loopback capability. And where was that? Under miscellaneous? There, you got to show loopback ports. So once that's showing, you've got that's not going to show in here, but I can show in here where what I can send to loopback as well. So I can loop back into other inputs. Yeah. Pretty amazing. Okay, anyway, do we have any other things to discuss? I just wanted to introduce for people to muse about this idea of using filters and filtered inputs and filtered outputs to do various things. So here's a filtered input, here's a filtered output. I could just be sending it something that I've converted it to, just be using that for that. Getting beyond, since we already have a version of suppress and include, since we can make it so it's only passing one thing, a suppress filter would not be a logical thing necessarily to use as my input, which I'm doing right here in test filter, but rather have some other fancy filter in here that goes way beyond suppress, like going to a program map, for instance. So I can take something in, send it to this thing, which is going to output a program map change. Anyway, you get the idea. I'm just sort of stroking the inspiration engines for people to think about that. Over the weekend, I am going to dive in and I'm going to mess around with this and see if I can create some useful items using this philosophy, this approach. And my hope is that it makes it easier to select from a list of things that you've got kind of pre-set up. So I can go to my bindings and have a few of these racks sitting in there, or one rack that has a whole lot of different things in that one rack, like a template rack or a master rack. But it uses those inputs as targets for me to aim to, and outputs that are already pre-filtered and pre-massaged, and it's easy to see by the name what part of the controller I've tapped off of, for instance. or what part of the state I've tapped off of, or what part of the, just whether I've enabled or disabled things. Okay?
Interesting.
Yeah.
And another.
I have a question that just I've been thinking about, and that's I've never used an alias, and I notice I haven't seen a lot of that anywhere else.
Yeah.
Every time you can name something, what's that for?
I'll show you.
Giving something.
It's the greatest thing. Let's bring it up here. Audio ports. Okay, so you have aliases. These are the ones you're talking about.
Yep.
Say in an earlier iteration of this, all I called it was ESQM in.
Oh, it'll map to that. So it's sort of like you've redone things and you want to not have to change a million.
Yeah,
If you have to load an old song that you made last year, let's say, with different ports, different names, then you are able to load it without renaming it.
That could be a real chore.
I'll say.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was one. Okay,
That's what it's for.
Sense.
And I think you can do aliases with commas. Pretty sure you can put in a bunch.
Yeah, I know you can. Yep.
Yeah.
You can decide to rename your ports in a more logic way and still be compatible with your old stuff.
Right. Or, maybe you called everything
Patchouli.
Kurzweil K2500. You don't have it anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's say you change the keyboard and you have named all your ports with the name of the old keyboard, and now you want to start using the new name but also be compatible with the old songs, and so
that's it.
Yeah, especially for MIDI ports.
Got it.
That's the aliases for sure, because all the time people are using different ones. One thing I forgot to talk about, under shared files, you've got this one section that's called Community Racks Exchange. It should be a different name, really, because of what it became. What it became is state-driven presets racks for all these different instruments. So these are all states galore that, because they didn't work with the drop-downs, it adds the drop-downs to it. And there's so many of them, it's unreal. So Dave started it out with these, with the ivories, and Neo Soul stage keys, because these presets didn't show up, and then I jumped in with my K5K, my WS SR, favorite ROM banks, ESQM racks, and they're all a TX81Z rack that all worked off of the presets and were easy to change the names of. If I I could use it as a template and just go through and change the names if I loaded in new hardware presets.
So, I didn't really look in here that much. I'm going to take a little jump in here and get a few of these racks and try them out.
Yeah, that's misnamed because it really should be named for the fact that most of the offerings are presets.
Right.
I mean, look, at my K5000, this is all of the presets that you could buy back in the day.
Wow.
All turned into racks. So you have to go in there and manually type every single thing in.
Right.
It takes forever.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, super.
See you next week.
Yeah, see you next week. Bye-bye.
Yep, bye.